Sea&Learn program, we're always talking about field projects. How you get those beautiful Sea&Learn t-shirts. The only way you get one, do a field project. Well, yesterday afternoon, our speaker from tonight, Sönke Johnson, took a group of 10 divers out diving, and one of the divers said to me this morning, "What do you think about when you go diving?"
Fish.
Diving deep, diving around a reef, seeing lots of stuff. Well, think about hovering in 20 feet of water and not covering much space at all, and bringing up organisms that are so tiny you can't see them without shining a light on them. And one of our divers, Tammy Schneider, who is a return visitor to Sea&Learn, a return visitor to Saba, shot a little video yesterday afternoon of some of the stuff they saw. So sit back and enjoy, and soon we'll get going on with our guest speaker.
Y'all, yeah, I'm talking to Leslie too much, I think. So, welcome here at Shearwater, and I would like to introduce to you the keynote speaker of tonight, Sönke Johnson. He actually is a biology star, and he was trained in math and art. He even briefly fantasized to be a professional baseball player, and he taught kindergarten for a while. But then he decided to pursue a career in biology. And he was actually quite successful at that, because now he's an associate professor at the Duke of biology at the Duke University. Well, I thought that was quite cool. But I have a good question for you. Has anybody saw the movie Finding Nemo? Raise your hands. Who did? Well, that's almost everybody, right? So remember the scene where Dora and Marlin get stung by jellyfish, and I think after that they just wake up in the dark, and this ball of light, like just mesmerizing, like in front of them, and then this big anglerfish is just attached to this light. Well, Mr. Johnson actually advised the makers of Finding Nemo on how these creatures look like, and how the light looks like in different depths. So I would like to quote actually one of the turtles of the movie. "Dude, that's awesome." Let's hear a big applause for Mr. Johnson.
Okay. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, now can I see the screen? Can you guys? What?
You're going to have to get out of the wind a little bit.
Okay.
Look towards the next
Yeah. See this well? Well, you're not going to see much on that one. Okay. Clouds. Okay. All right. So, thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Saba for hosting me for this week. I've just had a totally wonderful time. This is an amazing place. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is what exists when you go past this island. Next slide. So this is just bathymetry of Saba. You can sort of see Saba itself, the island, is the black area in the upper right. And then what you're looking here are sort of contour lines going down into the ocean. And when you're diving, you're sort of confined to that very thin area at the top, that sort of red part there. It's going down to maybe 30 meters at the most, possibly 40 or so. But then you can see that it just keeps going down. And if you go offshore here, let's say 10, 20 miles or so, or in certain directions even less, pretty quickly you're in hundreds of meters of water, eventually thousands of meters of water. And this is sort of the dominant sort of biome of our planet. It's sort of the open ocean water column. I mean, we all know that the ocean covers, about 3/4 of the Earth's surface, but the ocean is also tremendously deep compared to life on land. The average depth of the ocean is about 2 miles, 10,000 feet, about 3,000 meters. And so it's an enormous volume. It's actually about 99.5% of the Earth's livable space. And so if an alien were to come to the Earth and stick down his or her its hand, pull out an animal, they'd be pulling out an animal from the open ocean. And so what I'd like to do today is give you a tour of this open ocean world that surrounds the reefs of Saba. And we're going to start at the very top, at the surface, and we're going to work our way down to a depth of about 1,000 meters. So we're first going to start at scuba depth, look at some of the animals there. Then we're going to get into a submersible, and we're going to take that submersible down through the water column and look at a lot of the different animals that live there, and talk a little bit about why they look the way they do and act the way they do. And then eventually the submersible is going to land on the bottom at a depth of about 1,000 meters. I'm going to show you what some of the habitat there looks like. Some cameras are on that submersible, and with a little bit of luminescence. Okay, next. This is just sort of showing you the tour here. We're going to start at the top with animals that you're pretty familiar with, and then work all the way down to really strange groups. Is the wind a problem with the night? Would it be better if I went to the other side? Okay, try that.
Right there. You don't get close to the end. Right there is good.
But I won't know what I'm looking at. Didn't memorize it. All right, well then I guess I better come back out here. All right, next. Okay, so this first part is going to be at scuba depth, but it's a really unusual sort of scuba diving in that you're not on a reef, you're not actually seeing any bottom at all. In most cases, the bottom's about 1,000 meters down, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 meters down. So if you drop anything, it's gone for good. We had one guy when we were diving, he dropped about a $1,000 camera, and we knew that, when we finished diving, we cleaned up our stuff, hosed down our gear, we went for eating lunch, the camera was still going down. It took that long to get to the bottom, so it gives you an idea of how deep this is. And we work from can you go back actually? We work on a tether system because there's really nothing you can use for reference at all. And it's very easy while you're fighting to get an animal into a jar to sink to, let's say, 100 meters depth, and then you're in really big trouble. So we're tied up in a tether system. We swim around with little jars, and we collect all kinds of different critters down to a depth of about 30 meters or so. Next. This is one of the animals we see down there pretty often. I think they're actually also around the island here. This one's called Orchistema. It's a jellyfish. You can see that it's just really, really wonderfully clear, which many of these animals are, but then it has these funny little yellow feeding tentacles. Next slide. This is actually the jellyfish from Finding Nemo. When there's that whole giant school of jellyfish and they're popping from a 1 to 1 to 1, this is the one. But this one is actually in really big trouble. You can see the belly of the jellyfish on top, looks like a nice happy jellyfish, but then you see this weird thing hanging below. This thing hanging below is actually a parasitic sea anemone that swims in the water and latches on to the feeding appendages of jellyfish. So basically any kind of food that this poor animal gets is immediately devoured by this anemone, which whenever it doesn't get enough food, starts munching on the rest of the jellyfish. So this would be like, having some sort of nasty alien wrapped around your head, getting all your food first, and when it's unhappy, dissolving your head too. So not a good life for this particular jelly. Next. This is an animal that actually is right here, and we saw a number of these on our dive on Thursday. It's called a comb jelly, or a ctenophore. The actual name of this one is called Oceropsis, and it sort of looks like it's coming out at you like a hand, and that's actually how it swims. It sort of claps this bell together and moves through the water. And it's about as clear as glass. It looks really iridescent when you see it up near the surface. Next. This is a really pretty guy. It's actually a swimming snail. It's a snail that instead of crawling on the ground spends its entire life swimming through the water. And neat thing about these guys, you see all the little white dots on it? They're not normally there unless you touch it. And so as soon as you touch it, all these beautiful little white dots appear. And one of the fun things we like to do when we go scuba diving is sort of touch them as they go by. Sort of light up like little Christmas trees. Next. This is a swimming snail again. Have any of you heard of newtbraks? Sort of colorful little snail-like slug things that crawl on the bottom and have all sorts of bizarre patterns. This is one that actually lives out in the open ocean and more or less lives its life like a fish. It's actually got a little tail and can swim along and everything else. Next. And then we also have octopi. This one, of course, is on the bottom. Now we can actually step back to the shore a little bit to show you the bottom animals before we go deep. Next. And then we have a whole lot of different kinds of crustaceans, mostly different sorts of shrimp, all sorts of strange places. This is actually called the sexy shrimp because it sort of sits on the ground and then waves its butt back and forth like this to attract females. I'm not sure how successful it is at it, but it's actually only about 1 centimeter long, so you really sort of got to give the guy credit. Then you have other shrimp like these guys, and what you see in a lot of these sort of midwater animals, ones sort of swimming out the water, they have these long, long appendages that go out in all directions. They just look really crazy. Next, please. And then you have these. Some of you may have seen these on the reef. This is a leader shrimp. Those are always animals they like to feature at Finding Nemo. Funny thing that lived in the fish tank that had a French accent. Yeah, exactly. That guy. Yeah, this is one of those. It's a pepper shrimp. And they have a fun cleaning mutualism with fish where they'll go up and clean them up. This is a larva of a relative of a flounder. So before a flounder actually gets to the bottom and just lay there and have 2 eyes on one side of the head, they actually look like fairly normal fish swimming through the water column. Next. And then this is actually a larva of what's called a scorpion fish. These later on will sort of look like big and red and have funny big eyes. And then this is, keep this guy in mind. It's a real favorite in my lab. I'm not sure why, but everybody loves this guy, I guess because he looks so cute. He is the larva of something called a sea toad that's very, very deep. Lives at least 1,000 meters down. Next. And this guy is sort of a personal favorite of mine. It's called Christogenes. And if you look, look on his dorsal fin, you see all those little spots and all that. Just this nice, festive little arrangement. And he's, so proudly displaying. This is an open ocean fish. It's really only about 1 centimeter long. And so, if you look behind you at the size of that ocean and imagine that ocean wrapping the whole planet, this tremendous volume I'm talking about. Can you imagine a little 1 centimeter fish? Not running into many of the things out there, but nevertheless, it's nicely decorated for whoever might come by. It's sort of like, I think of it as like the ultimate optimist. At some point, somebody, Mrs. Christogenes will swim by and see that beautifully, that nice little dorsal fin, and it'll be a good day. Just blows my mind. Okay, so now we're going to leave the surface waters and go deeper down. This is the pilot sphere of the Johnson Sea Link submersible. It's about the size of a small school bus or a big helicopter. The front compartment is a nice big sphere that you can sit in side by side, a pilot and then a scientist observer. And in the back there's something more like a diving bell, which has a backup pilot and another scientist that can look out through portals. And in the old days, that back bell actually could be opened up in the bottom. You could pressurize the inside to the pressure of the outside, open it up, have a moon pool, and go scuba diving at 1,000 feet down. It was sort of a pretty mind-blowing trick. You also had to make sure you found your way back to the submersible when you were done because the pressure was pretty bad. I can imagine. All right, so we're going to go down. Now we're going to look at some of the different animals you see when you go deeper, starting with sort of jellyfish animal, moving our way up to different kinds of fish. This is a nice jellyfish called Colubanema. There are a lot of these sort of this type. They tend to be very clear, but then they have these muscle bands that are just beautifully iridescent. They sort of light up in color as they swim by you and shine the right light on them. Next. This guy has a really small, it's only about 1 centimeter across. It's called Pantachogon. I like it because it's got a lot of different colors on it. It's got sort of a red gut, which is that little red blurry ball sort of right there. And then those squiggly lines going across, one after the other, they're sort of orange, where it keeps them gonads, basically eggs, sperm, and so on. And then the iridescent colors you see, the blue and other things there, are the muscle bands, again, catching the light of the flash. Next. This guy is called Aegina. It's another jellyfish. He has 4 tentacles. They have this sort of really nice lemony kind of color. And actually, their species name is Citrata because like citrus. Next. I like this guy. He's called Vampirocrosata. It seems like for whatever reason, scientists who study deep sea animals like put vampire vampire somewhere in the name of the animal because it just makes it sound really cool. So a lot of the ones that are really reddish or sort of evil looking get sort of a vampire name in there. This guy looks really impressive with all the tentacles. You sort of imagine being sucked into the maw of this thing, but it's only about a centimeter across. That said, though, there are very large jellyfish in the deep. We have actually shown up and seen jellyfish the size of the front of the submersible just appear in front of us. So there's some really, really big things out there. It's just when you're actually doing collecting, it's much easier to get the small stuff. And there's some very big stuff down there. You need a very big jar to collect something the size of your sub. Next. This is just a nice pretty deep sea jellyfish. It's called a narcomedusa, like, narcotics. I actually we don't know what particular species this one is. Next. These guys are really common all over the ocean. It's called paraphila. I like it because it looks like there's a little Hershey's Kiss buried inside of it. And you find them all over the world. And this is a funny thing about the ocean. So, if you were to go to the coral reef here, you'd see certain fish that are actually local to this area, or at least local to the Caribbean, East Caribbean, with Leeward Isles, and so on. But when you go to the open ocean, most of the animals you see can be seen all over the planet. It doesn't matter if you're off of Australia, it doesn't matter if you're off the Indian Ocean, it doesn't matter if you're in the Atlantic. If you're at about the right depth and the water temperature is about right, you're going to see the same sorts of animals. It's like the ocean is like a giant mixing pool. Where everything meets everything, as opposed to land and reefs where you have to have a lot of sort of individual species in regions. So if you go to one part of the ocean in a certain way, you've really seen all of them, which is nice. So if you ever get into a really horrible dive accident and you just start going down, and it's really bad, but you've got a good tank of air, just pay attention the whole way down. I mean, you're going to die anyway, and you'll know that you'll actually have seen the whole world's ocean. You won't just think, I've only got to see, death off of Saba. You'll actually have seen the whole world's ocean on the way down before you die. So definitely look for it. This is a baby jellyfish. The adults are called the coronate medusa, and I like this one because you can just see the sort of little stubby tentacles already coming out and so on. This thing's really only about 1 millimeters across. You can see sort of the mouth appearing and all that. It's really adorable. This is a different group. They're called the siphonophores. The ones you've probably seen are Portuguese men of war. They're really interesting critters, the siphonophores, in that they're halfway between being a colonial organism, meaning that they have a lot of different parts that are all stuck together, that are individuals, and being like us and having one individual with a number of organs. So these animals are right in between that. They have a lot of different parts that look like individuals, but they can't live by themselves anymore, but they're not completely incorporated the way we think of organs inside of us, like a liver, or a heart or lungs or so on. And so they're this neat alternate answer to how life works, which I really like about them. Some can really get quite large, tens of meters long. A number of them are extraordinarily toxic and can burn your skin and so on. This particular one, called Hippopodius, its main claim to fame is that it's normally clear when you touch it in terms of pain, which I talked about a little bit on Monday. Next. This is another siphonophore. You can see just sort of how strange they look. They really look kind of like they were made like in a glass studio or something like that. This one's called Voctia. It's just a tremendous variety. Some of them are totally ridiculous, like out of some sort of like sci-fi movie or so on. Next. Now we're moving to a different set of animals. These are comb jellies again, ctenophores. But the ones that you saw near the surface, like that Oceropsis I showed you that was clear, now they become colored. Some of them are deep, deep red. Some are actually purple. There's some of the few animals in the deep sea that are purple for reasons that aren't really understood. And those lines you see going across them, and especially the iridescent part going around the bottom there, that's actually their locomotion system. They have millions of tiny little paddles that they frantically move like little oars, and they move themselves in the water very, very slowly. They're actually called cilia. They're some of the largest cilia. We actually have the same cilia inside our lungs and inside our windpipe that are continually moving mucus and other debris up and then back down our throats so that our lungs don't clog up. And cystic fibrosis is a disorder where we become less good at doing that. And one of the reasons we get really bad coughs and so on after the flu is that we've destroyed those little cilia for a time with the disease. And so you have tiny little cilia here and then bigger ones here that are actually used to move an entire animal around. Next. This is another ctenophore gum jelly. You're only seeing like a part of it here. The pictures there mostly to show how nice and iridescent those little rows of cilia are as they're sort of beating along to move this animal through the water. A lot of these animals don't actually have common names for sure, but some don't even have scientific names because only a few people in the world have ever seen them. Like that animal there, it's only a handful of people that ever see them, and the person who saw it first, that's supposed to be the one to write an article and give it a name and all those other things, has never really gotten around to doing it. So we just call it the big red ctenophore. Not great, because they all look red down there. So I keep telling Steve, write this up. This is a deep sea swimming worm. It spends, again, like all these animals, spends its entire life swimming. Sort of a rough life. It's called a tomopterid. And we actually saw some of the shallow versions of this on the dive on Thursday. The shallow ones are completely clear. They look like little swimming chandeliers. But the deeper ones tend to be red or sort of brown, but again have the little paddles that use to swim around. And these guys get quite big. They get to be about 60 centimeters long or so, or about 2 feet. Next. This is another kind of a worm. It's called an alceopid. If you look at the upper right there, you can see these two sort of balls at the end. Those are actually its eyes. It's got two really big eyes. The third evolution of a good eye in the animal kingdom, aside from what we have and what squid and octopus have. And then you see all these little red dots going all the way down it. Each one of those is a tiny little ink sac. And when you disturb it, it ejects the ink into the water, and all the water around them becomes yellow for reasons that we really don't understand. But it's apparently there for a reason. And now, it's talking to us in English. Okay, this is a pteropod. Again, it's a swimming snail. If you look at the top, you can sort of see these flappy things. Those are actually a normal snail's foot that has evolved to become wings. And these guys just sort of flap their way through the water. And different ones have different sort of lives. Some of them just munch on really little things. Some are really predatory. Next slide. Yeah, these guys are really predatory. They're called sea angels. Their scientific name is peony. And they look really cute and adorable, despite their funny little horns. But they're nasty, nasty predators. And they're highly specific for one animal. They only prey on one species of animal. And inside that cute little head, they have an entire Swiss Army knife setup that's completely designed to take out one species. They know just the right shape and claws and everything to reach into the animal they do want to kill and pull out all the good stuff and stuff it down their throats. And each species of these guys is just looking to basically kill one kind of animal. They can do with amazing efficiency. They can show up in large numbers. So they look cute, but if you're what they like to eat, they're not so cute. Next. This is another swimming snail. It's called a heteropod. You can see a few vestiges of its sort of original snail-like life. If you look on the left there, you can see a conical object sort of on the left. That's with the remnants of the shell. It's gotten rid of all the calcium from the shell, so that it's clear, and also it's not as heavy. Because if you have a big calcium shell, you're going to spend your whole life trying to lift it up. And to the right there, you see the sort of fin sticking out. That's what's left over of its foot that it now uses to paddle through the water. And if you look at the upper right, you can see a really strange eye and a mouth. The eyes of these guys are really, really weird in that the retina, instead of being like, a big area like the retina of our eyes, the retina is actually a line. It's a whole bunch of little cells all in a row. It scans the image into its brain one line at a time. And so it sort of looks like that, and then it just sort of gets them in one line at a time and then paints it back into its brain. It's one of the few animals that more or less works like a television set in reverse. Next. This is a deep sea octopus. But not an octopus that lives on the ground. It's an octopus that lives in the water its entire life. It's called Chapatella. It goes in two different morphs depending on what's happening to it. Normally it's very clear, but if you shine a light on it, it will immediately turn deep, deep red, like in a quarter of a second. And then if you shut the light off, it'll go back to being clear over and over. These guys are just strange all around. When they're ready to mate, they have a yellow light organ that completely surrounds their mouth that they turn on. And so it looks like a little yellow circle glowing in the dark. Then any males of that species that would be around recognize that signal and could come in to mate. Because octopus, unlike a lot of animals in the ocean, actually have to get together and copulate to reproduce. They can't just sort of send a bunch of sperm and eggs in the water and hope things work out. And so they need a way of finding each other. In the case of this animal, they do it by making a little yellow glowing circle at just the right time. Next. This is a deep sea squid. It's called Ganatus. There are many, many different deep sea squid. One of the ones we actually work on with the lab these days is actually the giant squid, because they have enormous, enormous eyes, as you probably know. The biggest non-giant squid eyes is found in swordfish. It's about this far across, about 4 inches, 10 centimeters. The giant squid eyes are about 30 times that volume. So they're like that. And so we are interested in why giant squid have giant eyes like that. It looks like the main purpose of it is to actually pick out sperm whales, which makes some sense. So there's a tremendous range of size in the ocean of squid. Some are just like a centimeter or 2 long, and some are just enormous, enormous, giant colossal squid. Next slide. This is one of my favorite squid. It's called the jewel squid, or Histiotuphis. And you're looking at the same animal photographed twice with the body turned 180 degrees in between. And if you look at the top picture, you'll see this big, weird, googly eye sort of pointed up and towards you. And then if you look at the bottom picture, the eye's actually really small. This animal is really strange in that it has one huge eye that always looks up and one tiny little eye that always looks down. The big eye looking up is looking for animals to sort of prey upon, and it's looking at animals sort of against the background light that's coming down. There's very little of that light, so it needs to be a really big eye. And then the little eye that's looking down is looking for little flashes of bioluminescence. And so it spends its whole life sideways, with these two completely cockeyed visual systems. Next. This is another one of these great vampire animals. This is called the vampire squid from hell. It's actually a scientific name, Vampiroteuthis infernalis. Basically means vampire squid from hell. It's not actually a squid, and it's not actually an octopus. It's a separate group that's related to these two animals, but different. And it's one of the stranger critters around. But all you're seeing here is one of the arms and then the webbing between. But the entire animal has this big sort of blood red eye, and the body is, quite black. And it's you can actually see some videos of it if you just go on YouTube, type in vampire squid from hell, and you'll just see some of what looks like one of the freakiest animals out there. They're specialists in a region of the ocean called the oxygen minimum zone. There are regions at depth where there's hardly any oxygen at all, and so most animals avoid it because they suffocate. But there's some very, very slow, patient animals that live in that world because they're protected from anybody that's got, a high need for oxygen, because nobody will want to go in there. They can just live like really, really slowly. I have a friend of mine who studies these. He studies animals that have almost no metabolism and barely move. Sort of coincidentally enough, he's sort of the same way himself. Trying to get him to talk at all. He's just very low guy. People often do end up like they're studying. Next. This is one of my favorite animals. It's called a Hyperion amphipod. This particular one is called Phronema. You're sort of seeing it, from the side there and then from the front. It's just nice little claws on it. So it's not terribly large. This one's only about a couple centimeters long, but has a really nasty way of reproducing. When it decides it's time to reproduce, and you'll see in a little bit, it looks for another animal called a salp, which is sort of like this jellyfish-like animal that has a sort of a barrel-shaped body, and then it chews out all the other parts of the animal that made it alive, and then it changes the structure of that barrel to make it hard enough to become a little nursery for its own eggs, and then later a little baby bug. So it's pretty much like, you decide, you want a kid, instead of making a nursery, you go find a friend of yours and then basically hollow them out and fill them with your babies. Gruesome. Next slide. This is another Hyperion amphipod called Cystosoma. The name basically means body like a bag, and the entire inside of this animal is liquid. There's almost nothing inside it that would make you think this thing should be alive at all. They're extraordinarily clear. If you put one of these in a cup in front of you, you will not see it. The only reason you can see it now is a big flash, camera flash aiming from the side to light it up. And that whole front part that looks like a head is actually two gigantic eyes. Next. This is just showing you that a number of the shrimp they don't have to be transparent. They're opaque ones. They tend to be a deep, deep red. This one's called notostomus. So when you get down there, you see a lot of transparent animals, and you see a lot of very, very red animals, which I'll talk about why on Monday. Next. You get other sort of weird deep sea crustaceans. Next. Then you get these guys. They're some of my favorite. This is actually a crustacean. Did any of you guys go on a night dive and move around and see bioluminescence? Those were ostracods. This is an ostracod, but this is the biggest ostracod. And, scientists naming things the way they do call it the giganto-ostracod. It's called Gigantocyprus. It's still not that gigantic. It's only about a centimeter across at most. But what's weird about it is you see those two big yellow things. Those are its eyes. But instead of having lenses, to focus the light like a normal eye does, there's two big retroreflector mirrors, just like they have in headlights. And they focus the light onto a retina that actually sits in front of the mirrors. And so you can actually look at these things and see the big sort of silvery gold headlights staring at you. And they just sort of cruise around pretty deep down, about 1,000 meters down. So we always pick out a few of these whenever we go do a trawl or a dive. And now we get to fish. And deep sea fish are especially sort of creepy looking for a number of different reasons. I mean, one, they tend to either be black or red, and we associate black and red with sort of creepy stuff. They have really large eyes in many cases. This one, not so much, but many do. And the eyes often look up, and that makes animals look creepy. They have photophores. That white purplish thing there is actually a flashlight that the animal uses to look around, and that can make them look creepy. And they have really big teeth for their size. There's not a lot of biomass in deep sea. When you find a meal, it's pretty rare. And so when you do find it, you want to make absolutely sure that it's not going to get away, because it's also very dark. And if the animal gets away, let's say 30 centimeters, a meter away, you may not find it again because it's really dark. And so once you dab on, you want to make sure you really got them. And so many deep sea animals have enormous long teeth. Some are so long that they actually have to have pockets in their forehead so that their lower teeth don't impale their brain but disappear into the pockets when they shut their mouth. For you to have teeth like this, they would be about 6-7 inches long, to give you an idea. And this one actually has some force behind those teeth. This particular animal actually bit me, and that's how we knew he was in the trawl bucket. We originally emptied out the trawl bucket in the dark because we were collecting animals and didn't want to find them. I stuck my hand in it, punched him in the balls, and decided to get back into the Then there's a bunch of milder animals. These guys get to be about 30 centimeters at the absolute most, usually more like 10-15 centimeters. It's a larva of an eel. They're called leptocephalus larvae. So eel, when they're grown up, are sort of big, opaque animals that live on the bottom. But when eel are young, transparent, very, very flat, live out in the water column. Then you get the funny things like this. Again, it's got nice little it can be a good, almost a meter long. They tend to get caught in our nets a lot. They're sort of tangled up in the mesh of the net. Next. And then you get this guy. He's another sort of favorite of mine. It's called the barrel-eye spookfish. You can sort of see why. You look at that eye on the right, sort of shaped like a barrel. That big ball on top of the barrel is actually the lens. So they're just really strange. And that whole bottom, the bottom surface is flat as a pancake and completely silvered. Again, for reasons we really don't understand. And actually, normally this animal looks even stranger. You notice how it sort of looks like it ran into a drain or something? The whole front is smushed in. They actually, filmed them, the whole front end there is enclosed in clear gelatin. And so it's like they have sort of a submarine for the front of their head, and the eyes are inside it. It's just that falls off really easily, and so you don't see it here in this picture. Next. Then you get these guys. Another one of my favorites. This is called a dragonfish. This particular one's called a Riscostomius. It's got two light organs under its eyes, and I talked about this on Monday. One of the light organs shoots out blue light as a headlight. The other one shoots out red light as a headlight. Actually, it's its own personal sniper scope. Again, it's got really big teeth. and you can see its jaw is actually its lower jaw is in two different parts. That thing that's sticking out from the lower jaw going up is actually one of its teeth. These things are really all about teeth. Next. Another way, sort of cute little deep sea guys. We actually have no idea what this is. We sent to every fish expert we could find. They couldn't figure out what this guy is. It's just a strange looking thing. Next. You get this guy. It's called a whalehead fish. I don't really know why, because it doesn't really look like a whale to me at all. But it has like a really distinctive look. Next. Then we get the anglerfish. As you know from Finding Nemo, there's a bunch of different anglerfish. They all have sort of a fun, freaky look to them. This one, the angle, the actual rod going out with the little bioluminescent lure at the end, is actually longer than the whole animal. And weirdly enough, it's also really stiff. And so we never really figured out what it's up to, because if you're trying to fish, I mean, I'm not sure how the animal actually catches anything with its mouth that's actually gone through the lure. So we've never been able to sort that one out. Next. Then you get ones like this guy. It's called Melanocetus johnsoni. See, it's got a much shorter lure, sticking straight up in the middle there. It's got a little bioluminescent ball. You can see how its eyes are continually at it. Basically, it spends its entire life looking at its lure, hoping something will come by, and if it does, then it can chop it with those teeth. These guys are also famous because what you're looking at here is the female. The females are the large ones. The males are not that much bigger than that little lure at the end there. And the male's whole purpose in life, if you want to think of it that way, is to swim around until he finds a female. And then he will bite her on her side. And once he's done that, he'll never let go. And eventually his brain, teeth, digestive system, and everything else will dissolve, and he'll become a parasite on the female. And the only thing he actually has to offer in return is his sperm. And he'll just keep injecting that in periodically when she's interested, and she sort of keeps him alive. But he's basically like a giant wart. And she can collect multiples of this. She can end up with a good 10 of these things hanging off her, basically her own little portable scrotum. And the male gets a good deal out of this. He gets a free ride, and the female doesn't really have to bother with them much. There you go. Next. Then you get anglerfish that have really, really complicated lures. Probably what's going on is they're not just used for luring fish, but they're also used to lure males of the right species. And so you end up with lures that have really complicated little patterns in them with lots of little things dangling down. Again, there's not that much known about it, so just one hypothesis. This one's called Eustomius. Next. And this is another one from the same genus. You can see how the lure in this one hanging down, looks different from the other one. And so the idea is it's sort of like this is the way, when you look at coral reef fish, they have all these different patterns and stripes and so on, and that's how they can sort each other out. In the dark, where you really can't see what anybody looks like, it doesn't matter if you have stripes. It doesn't matter, if you put on a nice jacket that day or whatever. All that really matters is what sort of pattern your bioluminescence means. So you can imagine you spending your whole life in the dark, going to dance parties where not only, you can't see anyone, but you can't talk to them, and the only way you can basically spot who's the right gender and who's the right species. Imagine, this dance party also has monkeys and goats and stuff, is that you have special flashlights that you wave around. So imagine, a dating world like that, you actually start to think you're pretty lucky. Next. You get really weird critters that have nothing resembling body parts that you're used to at all. This is called a Nemernian. At the lower left is its head. The only thing that goes with its head can actually eject a giant nose that will stick out almost as long as the animal itself that is used to attack things. Sort of a really weird critter that swims around the ocean. These are also found in mud flats and so on, but they're swimming versions like these. Next. Okay, so now we're actually on the deep sea floor. I'm going to show you what the actual habitat looks like. These are photographs taken either by me with a camera through the passenger sphere of the submersible, or by me using a camera that's mounted outside the submersible in a really, sort of like the mother of all really good pressure housings. What you're looking at here is actually deep sea coral. There are actually coral reefs in the deep sea. The coral is usually white. In this particular case, it's yellow. And they form reefs without sunlight. And so the idea, you have coral reefs, and you have the sunlight, and all those other things. There are actually coral reefs that spend their entire lives in pitch darkness. They don't have symbiotic algae and things of that sort, but they do nevertheless manage to make a living. And animals crawl over them like crazy. What you're looking at here are a number of different kinds of crabs that will climb up on these things and sort of pick plankton and such out of the water as they're brought by in the current. Next. Then you get completely different bottoms. This is the sandy bottom. Sea urchins. The difference between these sea urchins and the ones you guys can see is that a lot of these guys have really horrible toxins. So we tend not to pick these things up and bring them back to the source. They're really nasty. But you can see big fields of these things, just like sea urchins flying around. And the real deep sea is mostly full of these sorts of groups of animals we call the echinoderms. Things like starfish, sea cucumbers, sea urchins. And if you go deep enough, the world is basically a giant herd of sea cucumbers wandering the deep plains on these weird stalky legs like little tanks. It's really like actually probably the majority of the Earth's surface, if you include the bottom of the ocean as a surface, consists of weird walking sea cucumbers. It's really like life on Earth. Next. This is just sort of a nice pretty picture showing a couple of things that are down there. The thing on the left is called a sea lily. It's related to starfish and sea urchins and sea cucumbers. And then on the right is just like a piece of coral that like real pretty. Sort of gives you an idea of like what the world looks like down there. Next. This is again another sea lily. Their technical names are called crinoids. They're just really elegant. They're filter feeders in that they catch stuff that's been brought through by the water column in the current. Next. And then you get deep sea sea fans. In fact, if you looked at this, you would think maybe this isn't so different from one of your guys. You know, you're looking at a nice little sea fan, and then you look at what's wrapped up in it, which is a really, really big brittle star that is common in the deep sea. I'm not sure if any of you guys see brittle stars in your dives, but they look like hyperactive starfish. They're also called serpent stars. They move really, really quickly and run around. Some of the ones in the deep sea are really, really large. This is another serpent star, brittle star wrapped up in some coral. Things can get to be a good 60 centimeters across or so. They're really big, beady things. Next. And then here you have some coral, nice soft coral sort of branching up into the water column. And again, you see both a serpent star on the right and then a crab on the left, all of them just hanging out there. So any sort of surface area at all that animals can climb up on, they're going to use to get up in that water column to help catch stuff. Next. Again, this is sort of an example of that. You see a dead piece of coral, and then all these different animals are living on it. Those of you who have climbed up on Mount Scenery, and you look at the forest up there, the cloud forest and all the trees, and there's a million things growing on the trees, all the little ferns and so on. It's sort of like this. You just have things growing on things. Next. You also have sharks down there of a number of different kinds. Some get really large. There's a certain one called the six-gill shark that gets impressively large. I don't think we've heard over the meters, but I guess like 7 meters long or so, 20 feet. We put out sort of stealth camera arrays baited with food to see these guys come in, and they come in. And one of these camera arrays, I mean, it weighed a good 150 kilos, 300 some pounds. Really, really heavy thing. And one time we went down to get it, and it wasn't there. And it had been moved about 100 meters away without any drag marks. So some animal, presumably one of these sharks, had picked it up, walked it 100 meters, and put it back down. So it gives you an idea of what's actually down there that we don't see. As we like to say when we study deep sea biology, we study the small, the stupid, and the slow, because they're the ones that don't run away when we show up, once we catch nets. But there's some really, really big, fast, and possibly intelligent stuff down there. And whatever was in that, really big. Next. This is some kind of a grouper, so we have the light here coming up against the submersible. Next. And so now we're going to look at some of the things that are actually living on the bottom, just some of the different animals. You can see this coral. It doesn't actually look that different from some of the coral you might see on a coral reef. Next. It's just a starfish. You're looking at the top and the bottom. Again, doesn't look so different. And so the animals in the water column tend to look very, very alien. But a number of the ones that live on the bottom, you could put them in your fish tank, and the average person wouldn't be that wigged out by looking at them. Next. This is another sea lily, another feather star. Okay. Then this is another brittle star wrapped up in some coral. I always like this one because of all the little quills it made around everything. It was obviously very happy to be where it was. There it is again, more curled up. So it looks like it's peeking at you with two strange eyes, but those actually aren't eyes. They don't have eyes. These guys are also weird. That whole group of like sea urchins, starfish, and so on, is that they only have one opening to their digestive system. So basically everything comes in and then it's got to go back out the same way. So again, you might feel lucky in yourselves that you don't have to eat your food, digest it, and then basically defecate back out of your mouth. So we actually lead a pretty good life. That's what you think about it. This is a basket star. If you go on a night dive around here, I'm sure you would probably see basket stars. This is just a deep sea version of one. These get quite large, a good 60, 90 centimeters across. Next. This is one of my favorites. It's called a Medusa worm. This is actually a worm. And that whole part of the right sort of sticking out, sort of blob-like, actually sits down in the bottom. And the rest of it sticks up looking for all the world like it's an anemone. But then if you disturb it, it will jump up in the water and start swimming around, waving all these things. Sort of like a little funny little ballerina or something. Next. And then you get things, again, that look like something you could pick up off of any beach. This is a deep sea top snail. Like if you went to Sanibel Island in Florida, you might see one of these on the beach, except this thing only lives 1,000 meters underwater. Next. And then you have various deep sea octopus live on the bottom. They tend to be really, really red. A couple of them are bioluminescent, but they all have this beautiful red coloration. Next. A bunch of different sort of shrimp live on the bottom. Next. This one actually has a good trick. Then you get these guys, another one of my favorites. These are deep sea pill bugs. For those of you in the U.S., you know these things as pill bugs, roly-polies. They're little gray isopods that can roll up in a ball if you put them in your hand. Most called circus bugs and so on. But they're only like maybe a centimeter long. These guys get to be about like that and weigh a good, and basically, give a good name. They call them Bachynomus gigantea because, well, they're gigantic. And aside from being, really big and creepy and alien looking, you sort of look at the eyes there and you sort of see your death or something. But famous for having the slowest vision in the animal kingdom. Because there's so little light down there, they essentially leave, think of it like a camera, they leave the shutter running for a very long time. They do that because what they're interested in finding are rotting things. These guys are scavengers. And so when things start to rot in the deep sea, they often start to glow because bioluminescent bacteria start colonizing them. And so they're basically looking for glowing, rotting food. And slow eyes to pick up that very, very faint glow. For whatever reason, nobody else likes to eat these. So they can sort of scavenge their way along and move really slowly and so on. Nobody seems to pester them. We've had footage of 10 of these things mobbing over a whole bunch of fish we put down there. And an enormous shark will come in and just continually nudge them out of the way, not wanting to eat them so it can actually eat the fish. So whatever it is about them, they're just not tasty. None of us have bothered to try one yet. We usually do try to eat a number of the things that we bring up just to see what it'd be like, but this is not one anybody wants to eat. We're all afraid we'll die or something. Next. Then you get this guy's called the spiked sea robin. Good little critter. Next. Another one of my favorites here, this is called shawnettes. Remember that cute little larval guy that everybody likes, the little sort of white little, this is what it'll grow up to be. So that's kind of cute, swimming around the waterfall. This is a depression at the bottom, a small depression, it's only 10 meters across, 20. A depression in the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico that has extremely salty water. That's much saltier than the water above it. And it's so salty that light actually can't get into it because the light just bounces off it. And it sort of looks like this weird, smoking, cloudy lake just sitting there. It's total death for almost all animals, except for a very few that live around it. Mostly these giant mussels, and then surrounding the giant mussels are these guys, just one after another in a big circle, like they're worshiping the deep sea primates or whatever. They're all looking straight up for something to come by in that giant mouth like we'll nab it. It's really one of the oddest things I've ever seen. And then depressingly enough, right next to it was a toilet. Somebody had thrown a toilet over the sea. So it's one of the great weird things in the world, and then next to it is said, deep sea sharks. Can't remember the name of this particular one, but you can see if you look close up, that looks basically like a shark. For those of you who've been pictures of a shark, this is not what you see. You can see down here. There are some really weird deep sea sharks, but the ones we tend to see look like the kind of shark you see up here. It looks pretty shark-like. Next. So I'm going to do a last few things on bioluminescence, just a few slides, because remember, it's very, very dark down there, and all these pictures you see, they don't ever get to see that. It's very, very dark down there. When you're at 1,000 meters, there's no more sunlight left that anyone could see, no matter how good their eyes are. So they're doing everything by bioluminescence. And so while there are coral reefs, nobody ever sees them. So they signal with light. This is it's called a Venus flytrap anemone, and it has bioluminescent mucus. And so if you mess with it, it starts to secrete this very sticky, glowing mucus, and then you become covered with it. And then in a way, it's sort of like those exploding ink packets that they put in a money, when you watch like a movie about bank robbery, and then like they open it up and boom, all of a sudden this paint thing explodes and they're all blue and they've been marked. In a way, that's what we think this animal is doing, is that it's marking other animals for destruction by lighting them up. Because the second there's anything lit up, everybody's going to come in and investigate it. And so, you basically paint somebody with light. Next. Then you get, this is remember that yellow coral I showed you in the first, going to the bottom image? This is what it actually looks like when you touch it. It has all this beautiful blue, bluish-green light coming on all over it. Next. This is what the ochroid would look like. Again, the blue you're seeing there is, all the blue light that comes out of it when you touch it. The red you're seeing is not actually the color of it. If we shine red LED on it very, very briefly, just so you can see the outline of the animal. Next. Then you get this guy. This guy is a shrimp. Remember I showed you one of the shrimp. This guy can vomit light. So unlike other animals that have little cells that can make light, or they have bacteria that they actually keep in their little pockets and make light for them, what this animal does is it takes all the chemicals needed to make light, and then it puts them in different pouches, and then vomits them all into the water, and it mimics, just like if you have one of those glow sticks, you crack it, you break the glass, and separate it. Basically, like vomit, it's more cool. And then they surround themselves with a giant cloud of blue light. One of the neater things out. And then last here, I just wanted to show this image. It's one of my favorites. So the deep sea floor in this particular region, we went down, we're about 1,000 meters. This plane went on in every direction, and there was nothing. It was just sand, completely lifeless. Except, there's probably some weird little crawly things down in it. But otherwise, it looks like a big empty desert. And then you see this old, dead piece of coral. And then living on it are species after species after species, and many individuals of different kinds, all sharing this tiny little sort of habitat. So for me, it always looks like sort of like a metaphor for a community. You can even, if something's very small, you can put, a number of different animals or people with different interests, and all together, if they work together, you end up with a very nice thing. And so I just wanted to end with that. Next slide. And take any questions. Yeah.
Why is it that you can drop the red down there? Red block?
Yeah, so sort of like red is the new black in the deep sea. So water, if you go out here, you notice the water is blue. And the water is blue because it's very good at absorbing every other color but blue. So red light and all that, that's why your lips look black when you go deep. And so when you get to the deep sea, it's extraordinarily blue. It's like a laser. And so animals are red, not so that they can be red, but because if something's red, it means it's not reflecting blue. And so there's actually a pigment in the skin of red animals that makes them really, really dark in the blue. They're still able to reflect like the red, which is why they look red to us, but there's no red light down there. So if you go down there, they just the way red lips look black. And so some animals are good at making red, and some animals are good at making black. They both work equally well. It turns out invertebrates are pretty good at making red. Invertebrates are pretty good at making black. So if you go down there, you see a lot of red invertebrates and black fish. Yeah?
How many hours of submersion did we just to get all those pictures?
I don't know. So the animals were actually photographed on the ship, but to get the animals, I mean, I've probably been on about 100 dives.
And how long was the dive?
Dives are usually about 4 hours, so definitely don't worry before you go down. Actually, for those of you who were here last year, a really good friend of mine, Edie Witter, gave a talk on bioluminescence, and she and I went down on a similar measuring light in the deep sea. And it was a very, very boring dive because we just had to sit there and run a light meter. We didn't get to look at any animals at all. But the problem was that the dive had been canceled. And once the dive is canceled, you immediately go for the coffee pot. And I drank about 3 cups of coffee. And all of a sudden, okay. So you go down, of course, you really, really got to go to the bathroom, but you can't. And so Edie, to this day, just mercilessly teases me about this, about being trapped for 4 hours, they don't have anything to use. They hand you a sponge. They say, here, go ahead, pee in the sponge. I'm not going to pee in the sponge. You're all like 2 inches from somebody next to you. So, yeah, it's about 4 hours, which is a long time if you coffee. It's better than Alvin, which is the one that goes down about 20,000 feet to the deep sea vent communities, because then you're down for about 9 hours. And it's very small. I mean, the passenger sphere of the JSL is like that. You can touch both sides, and you're in there with somebody else. It's a ball. So, you're essentially touching everything. You're touching the person next to you, you're touching the walls, you're touching the instruments, you're touching the ceiling. It's very tight fit. So you can't be claustrophobic there. Other questions?
Yeah, I have another question. Just how do those animals here?
Are you funded by government or private?
It's a mix. We get some money privately, most of it's from the government, but it comes from different places. So some money we get from the National Science Foundation, some we get from fisheries, because some of the work we do ends up having a lot of implications for fisheries. There was also a separate program under NOAA, the National Oceanographic Atmosphere Association for Ocean Exploration. It was something put in by Bill Clinton before he stepped down that specifically is there to go explore new habitats in the ocean. So we get money from that too. So it's a mix. Some of it's actually from NIH. Some of the work we do ends up having applications for medicine. Like we do a lot of work on cataracts, believe it or not. Because understanding how animals are transparent helps you understand how human lenses are transparent and why they stop becoming so as you get older. Someone had a question back there?
About those pictures, do you guys found out things that you can use for technology or for fields?
Yeah, the way we usually like to think about it is basically if there's something that can be done with engineering, some animal thought about it 100 million years ago. About the only things that animals don't use is radioactivity. Just about every other optical, physical, engineering principle that we have ever known, some animals doing it far better than we can. So we end up, the stuff we do, ends up being used for low-light imaging systems, it ends up being used in commercial fishing, it ends up being used in better sorts of paints and structures, for different sort of camouflage. The thing is, we don't know what we know. So we usually, not always, but usually do sort of basic research. And so we try to find out, things that are interesting. And then from there, we're able to use that, for all sorts of different commercial and other benefits. But we don't go in with a very specific goal in mind. We sort of go, in some ways it's like luck, but you end up getting lucky a lot because it's an extremely interesting habitat that hasn't been explored yet. So almost everywhere you look, there's something.
Climatic change factors such as convection, are they going to actually severely affect the environment?
It's a good question. If the conveyor belt actually turned off, it would, because that's the source of oxygen in the deep sea. So some of you have probably heard of the Challenger expedition way back in the 19th century. The HMS Challenger went out did this many-year voyage to look at the deep sea. That was all of a sudden that there was any life in the deep sea at all. Because the idea is that there will be no oxygen down there. And it made good sense. Why should there be oxygen down there? And the reason there is oxygen down there is because of the oceanic conveyor belt. Basically, oxygenated water at the surface is brought to depth. So if that turns off, eventually, you start working through all the oxygen that's there. The more immediate concern is that the deep sea, because we don't see it, is a very much a not in my backyard sort of thing. And people have come up with remediation for things like CO2 and global warming using the deep sea. Like one idea was to take, the CO2 in the atmosphere, and then if you take it to the deep sea, it becomes sort of a slush. Actually, under that pressure, it compresses into sort of a slushy solid. The idea was to take basically all the CO2 that we're making too much of and just send it to the sea. But the problem is, not bothering us anymore. The problem is it's creating a vast killing zone all around it, that the CO2 just wipes out everything around it. And the other big immediate concern is that the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere is slowly acidifying the oceans. And you may have heard about, farther up, reefs. But for many of the animals that live in the mid-water, they're very, very delicate. They have a little bit of calcium in their shells, but they need to have it. These are many of the animals that are pretty far down on the food chain, too. And so when oceans become more acidic, it's more difficult to create calcium skeletons. And when they can't do that, they die, or they just don't live at all to begin with. And then all of a sudden the whole food chain in the midwater, which again is by far the largest habitat on the planet, becomes completely. And even though the deep sea is in some ways very far away